collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, following the recent launch of the second volume of his autobiography, we talk at length to the former President of the Republic, George Vassiliou. The volume covers his term in office, and he talks frankly about his successes and what he considers to be his failures, and above all, about the Cyprus problem.
And the rejectionists, as you call them, because they refuse to say that they are rejectionists. They say we reject the wrong solution, we favor a positive solution. Okay, everybody can say anything he likes. So the position, therefore, that they were taking is that essentially they were against the federation. That was late Tassos Papadopoulos. But they would not dare say it, and even Tassos said, I am in favor of a bisexual bicommon federation under the right terms. What were the right terms? It was that it should not be a federation.
Former Cyprus President George Vassiliou recently published the second volume of his autobiography. It covers the years he was in office, that's 1988 to 1993. He joins us now to talk about the book. And first of all, George, Volume 2, does that mean that there's a Volume 3 on the way as well?
Of course, it's not on the way yet, but it will be on the way, because Volume 2, as you just said, covers the period of my presidency, but then since I'm still alive, that means that there is a period after my presidency, and most probably the third volume will cover at least the 10 years after the presidency and up subsequently until the accession, up to the Annan Plan, more or less. Developments for that period.
You're still interested in and involved in a way in the politics of Cyprus, and particularly the Cyprus problem, aren't you? And you cover a lot about that in the book.
Very much so, and I'm very worried. Not only interested, but also worried, because I see that after the failure of the Crans-Montana talks, it's not easy to restart negotiations. And if we restart, I don't know from where we will start, and I do know that the United Nations and the Secretary General has sent us very, very clear messages that don't bother me until you are ready.
And do you think there's a chance that we can get ready in the relatively near future?
It's not a question of what I think, it's what we have to do. I think we have to get ready, we have to start talking, and hopefully to reach a solution. And if for some reason we don't reach the solution, then it must be absolutely clear that it is not because of lack of desire or efforts on our side.
There is a movement, it seems to me, in recent years, and also since Crans-Montana, that the rejectionist camp, the people who would like to keep the status quo in Cyprus, are gaining ground to some degree. I think in your book you mentioned about the Greek at the time,
yes,
who...
Lundas,
yes.
the ambassador to Cyprus.
What exactly was his role, in a sense, in trying... Why does Greece want to keep the status quo? Does it still want to?
No. That is not that Greece wanted. The point is that he was one of the best personalities, in terms of well-known and good in his job as an ambassador in the Greek Foreign Ministry. And he had written a letter himself to the then Prime Minister Papandreou, explaining to him why there should be no effort to solve the Cyprus problem then, because his theory, very briefly, was that Turkey is more powerful than us, and therefore any solution may be to the favor of the strongest part, and therefore it's better not to have a discussion, not to make negotiations, and the status quo is better than a solution, because he was under the impression then, and he was saying that privately, that the status quo would have been in our favor, because he was saying that Turkey, under its pressures and problems and so on, could one day either collapse or be much weaker, and Greece will be much stronger, and therefore we should wait until that moment. Well, unfortunately, as you know, it's the other way around that went. Turkey got stronger and Greece got weaker. And also, what is even, and I pointed out in my speech as well, that what was the status quo in 1986 and 85 and 87 and what is the status quo today, it's a hell of a difference, and all to our disadvantage.
Why is it that the Greek Cypriots don't seem to see that the more time passes, in actual fact, the weaker hand they have when it goes to the poker table?
Do you remember what Archbishop Makarios said when, after the disastrous results of the Kofinu conflict and the threat by Turkey that would invade, and Turkey then imposes these conditions. He said the Greek, I don't know exactly how many soldiers were here, but it was a few thousand certainly, that came secretly to Cyprus. The Greek division that came secretly to Cyprus has to withdraw, and it did, and Grivas has to go back to Greece. And all that Turkey asked was implemented, because Makarios was afraid that otherwise there may be invasion, which we had later. So, and also that there should be a solution, Makarios realized, which will not be anymore based on the one state which is really run by the president and not in cooperation with the vice president who was Turkish, as we were used to. And he said that this is the difference between ευκταίο and εφικτό. Ευκταίο means, I mean, you translate it, there is no English word, that what you wish. And εφικτό is what is possible, or rather what is the desired and what is the possible. My decision, I desired to become a billionaire. What is possible is to have a good salary, for example. Okay. But as long as I stick to my desires and hope that one day my desires, maybe, who knows, I can play Joker every week and maybe I will win. So I can still keep doing it.
So it's a lack of pragmatism, you're saying, really?
It's a lack of pragmatism. But Makarios said that. He said, all my life, he said, I was fighting and working for the ευκταίο, for the desired. But I now realize that we cannot ask for that. We have to go for the possible, to εφικτό. And because this is a complete change of policy, he said, I decided to submit the whole thing to a referendum, and if a referendum was against, I would resign. And they did a referendum, and she got 95%. At which time, nobody dared say that we want the desired, I mean, wish the desired. But they all accepted that what Makarios said was right. Unfortunately for us, and then, you know, the tragedy of Cyprus, and I've said that many times, was this conflict between the desired and the possible. And the tragedy here is even worse in this sense. The desire doesn't have to change. I mean, there are Greeks who still want to go back to Istanbul, to Constantinople, who say, well, this is what is our place. Okay, this is desired. You can always want that. What is possible is what you can achieve. And so the desire can stay static, but what is possible is not static. Because what is possible today may not be possible tomorrow, and what is possible tomorrow may not be possible after tomorrow.
Now, in your book, how do you deal with how you dealt with the Cyprus issue?
Well, I dealt exactly like that. First of all, I insisted that we have to start negotiations, because As soon as I started talking with government leaders, Thatcher, Reagan at that time, and later Bush, Mitterrand, Genscher, etc., they all said to me the same story, which is now repeated as well. They said, "You're right, it was unjust, the invasion was a terrible event, we were against it, and so on, but it happened. And therefore, what we recommend to you is to sit down and negotiate." And the rejectionists, as you call them, because they refuse to say that they are rejectionists, they say, we reject a wrong solution, we favor a positive solution. Okay, everybody can say anything he likes. So the position, therefore, that they were taking is that essentially they were against the federation. That was late Tassos Papadopoulos. But they would not dare say it, and even Tassos said, "I am in favor of a bizonal bicommunal federation under the right terms." What were the right terms? It was that it should not be a federation.
This all comes down, does it not, though, to what seems to me to be a basic lack of understanding about a negotiations process.
Yes,
you cannot set preconditions and say A, B and C, or we won't talk. You have to go with something in hand to exchange.
Exactly, my dear. And this is my position. This has always been my position. And in my book and in my speeches, and so I kept on repeating that I repeat the story which I will tell you as well, that in 92 I had the honor to meet Nelson Mandela in Davos. He was the guest of honor there, and we had some half an hour together somewhere. And I asked him, I said, I expressed my admiration for him and everything. And I said to him, how did you succeed in solving the problem of South Africa? So he said to me, look, in order to solve a problem, you have to take a decision that you want to solve a problem. That's number one. And once you decide that you want to solve it, then you have to sit down and negotiate. But you must know that once you negotiate, it cannot be a win-all situation. It has to be a win-win. And that means that you have to compromise. And once you compromise, then you have to agree the compromise as long as you think that it's the best thing you could get. And then you have a solution. And I also refer to an extract from a speech of the late Kennedy, who said that the brave people are ready to compromise, is those that don't dare say what they think, and that they say we insist on non-compromising, but in reality is because they are weak and don't have the courage to tell the truth to the people.
And the people really is the bottom line here, isn't it? Because the other thing in terms of the sustainability of any solution, should it come, it needs the support of all Cypriots, of all walks of life.
That is true, but you know, another argument that was used by many people, even those that also said that we'll accept the solution, but we have to make sure we accept it by zone or by communal federation, but we have to make sure that it will not collapse after some time. And I stated very clearly that this is nonsense, because within the EU, once you have a solution within the EU, and both sides accept the EU, the acquis communautaire as it's called, and so on, then what will collapse? The basis of it is there. It doesn't change. It doesn't depend on you. Secondly, you may have a disagreement like they had in Belgium. They were without government for 1.5 years. But nothing collapsed. Belgium was still there, and things went on until the two sides, the Wallons and the Flamands, decided to find a compromise solution. That refers to the two-state solution, of course, with the Catalans. But the point is that you can have a situation where you disagree, but the system doesn't collapse. The system is there because it's decided not by you, but by the European Union. All the basics are there, and any future decisions are taken in Brussels. Anyway, your role is to implement them, and then you will implement them.
Let's get back to other parts of the book and your time as president. What particularly did you feel you needed to include in the book? Because I imagine there was an awful lot that you had to say, no, I won't put that in and I won't put this in.
Look, the book consists of two parts, essentially, or rather three. The basic two parts are, the one is the efforts to solve the Cyprus problem, and the other part is whatever actions we took in order to change the situation in the islands to the better. And the third part of the book, which is the end, is the elections and why I lost the elections and some self-criticism about...
We'll come to that in a minute.
Yes, okay.
But about the actual, let's say, the ordinary government part of the book.
The ordinary government part, well, there have been many achievements which it's not up to me to keep mentioning them, but you know, when the presentation took place last week, both Mr. Neophytou expressing his views, but of course being the president of DC, and Mr. Charalambous, member of the Politburo of AKEL, and Mr. Michalis Papapetrou, a well-known commentator, if you like. They all praised me for what we achieved. As I said, I was a man of vision and so on. But if we come down now to specifics, first of all, something that people don't realize, because they think that it was always there, is that Cyprus became a democratic country for the first time. Because democracy doesn't mean to elect. What democracy meant when Makarios was there, everybody voted for Makarios. So this is not a proof of democracy. The proof of democracy is...
when there's a choice, as much as anything.
Not only when there is a choice, but for example, in Cyprus at that time, if you were a civil servant, you could not go to your job holding another paper than Eleftherotypia, which was the paper of the Democratic Party then. I mean, if you made a mistake of going there with a Haravi or with Alithia was of DC or Haravi was of AKEL, then you would be certain you will never be promoted. And if there was any possibility to get rid of you, they would have done it, and so on.
Well, no, I think a lot of people know that you tried to clean up the civil service and you were fairly successful at it.
Yes, but that is not a question of cleaning up. The concept of democracy, it was nothing to do with the more efficient civil service. That's another issue. Democracy, people learned that, and we put it into a law, the civil servants, and following up to that even in private employees as well, they were free to read any paper they liked, to believe anything they liked, right, wrong, left, right, left, nothing, etc. They were permitted to stand, to be members of a party, and to stand in an election without losing their job, whether in private sector or in public sector. Now, these things today are taken for granted, but they were not granted. It took a lot of effort in order to ensure that this will go.
So that's one of your major achievements that you're proud of. There are others, I'm sure.
Oh, there are others, but this is the interesting thing about this achievement, is that if you speak to anybody who is 30 or 40 years old, he will think that these things were there. Anyway, that's one. Now, other thing is, take the town planning. There was a law on town planning which was adopted back about 6 or 7 years before my election. But the parties, they adopted the law because they didn't want to vote against the law, but they did not permit the implementation of the law. So it was there. So the anarchic destruction of Cyprus was going on and on and on. So I made sure that this law was at the end accepted by everybody and implemented. And since then, there was a real town planning. Now it's fashionable for everybody to say that I'm an environmentalist. Yes, but at the time of I was elected, there were no environmentalists. I remember that the first ever meeting, even before my election, of people that were caring about the environment was down here in this building. And we promoted the idea that the environment is the commonwealth of everybody. So, between other things, in addition to the law on town planning and so on, I created the environment department and appointed the first director of the department. And now everybody speaks about the importance of the Department of Environment. But it didn't exist. There was nothing. So we had to do that.
And the University of Cyprus.
Now I'm coming to that. The University of Cyprus. Cyprus was the only country, not the only, there was another one or two countries in Africa, I think, or Latin America, which had no university, small ones. And there was a reaction against the creation. Can you believe it? They were against the creation of it. Why? Because they were saying this is a slogan by the people that are against Greece, because if we create a university in Cyprus, we will cut the umbilical cord between Greece and Cyprus, and therefore we are against it. And I had to say no, it will help the relations between Greece and Cyprus, as we know now, but I had to fight. And in the parliament it took time, and even after it was established, they were making difficulties for me. The university should have been started operations in 91, but because they were making all kinds of difficulties, we moved it on to 92, and then when we had the celebrations about it, there was a lot of fight against it. Today, everybody is a fantastic supporter of the university, and since then there have been so many universities and so on, and we know that why it's important. But therefore, what I try to say is that the fights we had to make were fights that you consider them today that it's not serious. I mean, was it possible that people don't want the university? Is it possible that people want to destroy the environment, etc., etc.? Or is it possible, coming now to what you said about the civil service, that the civil service, we want the civil servants not to work, but it's not a question of we want them not to work. We wanted to fight bureaucracy. We wanted to make things easier for people. To give you a small example, in those days, you had to renew your license for owning a car every 6 months. So every 6 months, huge queues were created all over. So we abolished that. Okay, so no queues necessary. What you will not believe, I'm sure you have a car, and I'm sure you drive, and if you go at 7 o'clock in the evening or 8 and the petrol station is closed, you can still fill it up and pay through that. It was not there. I had to fight. The petrol stations were against ATMs being provisioned there. I had to fight to implement it because I wanted to make life easier. And now everybody says it's a good thing. Can you imagine petrol stations without ATMs? No. But it was very much a reality.
And we should say petrol stations that closed at 5 or 6 p.m. and didn't open again until 7 in the morning.
Yes, exactly. So whatever you look at, there were so many things that were there. And I was reading a book by a Greek philosopher, Charalambous, who said the secret of bureaucracy is that people don't like to see changes in their lives. Yeah, I'm used to this. I have learned 1 and 1 makes 2. I don't want to know that 1 and 1 may be sometimes it makes 2.5 or something else. So I want to stick to what I know.
And you need vision to change that.
And you need vision to change that. And this is exactly, if you like, what I believe, and I could keep on talking about it for hours and hours, but what was the achievement of my presidency is that I had a vision. I mean, one example, ECU. In those days, there was no euro, and Cyprus was not a member of the European Union. But there was the ECU, means European Currency Unit, which they created in order to help transactions between them. And Cyprus was the first country in Europe which was not member, because the members of the EU then were 6, and then later they became 9. So any other European states, there were about 30 or 40 of them, Cyprus was the first, as a result of my pressure, to decide that the Cyprus pound would be pegged to the ECU. It was not a peg in the sense that it would be obligatory, but from the moment we did it, we created a feeling of stability. Cypriots knew that their money has a certain value, 1.7 ECU to the pound. And that was that. It could go to 1.6 or 1.8, but it was that. And it helped the economy to go up. The efforts that I made to reduce the taxes. My people in the Ministry of Finance were saying, but President, okay, we all want less taxes, but how will we survive? How will we get enough money in the budget? And I told them that don't worry, we will end up in getting more. So we reduce the taxes, but increase the incomes. How? Because we reduce the tax evasion. With high taxes, there is hedging, we have a lot of evasion. With lower taxes, everybody prefers to be okay with his government, and there was no evasion.
Can we come now to the regrets, the mistakes? Because you're very frank, I think, in the book.
Yes. Look, in essence, I never fought an election. When I was candidate the first time, I was fighting for it for a whole year. When I was president, people around me were telling me, President, we have to think about elections. No, we have meetings in New York, which is important for our problem. And I have to give priority to that. And that lasted for the whole of March until end of August. I've been continuously fighting for Cyprus. And of course didn't even think that there is such a thing as election. And subsequently the Secretary General wanted us to go back. And I went back. DC and Rico and the DEC refused to come before they came, but then they said, no, we're not coming. And they started electioneering, but we were fighting for Cyprus until we reached decision 789, which was in November 92. And even after that, instead of coming to Cyprus, I stayed in New York for a long time. Then I went to Brussels in order to get it approved, the Galley set of ideas, to get it accepted and supported by the EU, which I did. So in essence, whatever efforts I've made for my re-election was done something in January, which is, if you say that now, they will say you are talking nonsense. That is one of the mistakes. Now, why did I do that? Because I was under the illusion, if you like, that people will recognize that, well, what is important is to solve the Cyprus problem. So to whom should we give priority? To elections or to the Cyprus problem? And I thought that people will realize that is important. And in actual fact, people realized, because in the first round, I received 45%, and Mr. Klididis only 35%. So that means, and Akel and others people who were supporting me, well, they may have had 30 or 32%. So from 32 to 45, it's a hell of a lot of people that recognized what we were doing. They sensed that we were on the way to solution and also on improvement of the economy and so on. In that time we had 10% growth and so on. And they expressed this appeal. But when it came to the second round, in weeks' time, then already before that, the late Glafkos thought that it is his last chance. So he decided to abandon the Galley set of ideas and to support the idea of Rico and Kyprianou, who was dead against the solution and dead against the set of ideas. And even so, they won the election, if they won the election, by a few hundred votes.
But that's partly because you didn't do what a lot of people have done in the past and fly people over from abroad.
They told me there are 3,000 students that are ready to come. And I told them, why waste your money? That is one thing. These 3,000 would have been enough. But also, there was an effort, a lot of votes were considered as invalid because in some way, if you put a mark here, and if this went outside the box a little bit, it's nothing. It's in reality, it's accepted now. But then they said it's invalid. So there was this thing happening. We had no party to take care of it, and of course, Akel did what they did, but it was not enough. We did not have our delegate, and they were coming to me and saying, "President, be careful. There is a lot of this happening. We have to ask for recount." And I thought seriously, the people who were against me, mainly part of DC and DICO, had started celebrating that they may have won. And I realized that even if we had recount, and assuming, I was sure I would have won, but with a few hundred votes difference. But this would not have never been accepted by the others. It was the government asked for recount, and then they must have did this or that, and so on. And essentially, Cyprus would have been divided into two fightings. And I said, no, I prefer to lose the election rather than lose
set
the country.
people against each other.
Yes.
All right, so the book has been published, now obviously in Greek.
Yes, and because a lot of people have expressed an interest in having the book in English, but the book is not in English, so I decided to have it translated now. The translation has started. Who will be the editor? I would prefer to have an editor in the UK in order to ensure the wider, because I'm interested in promoting the Cyprus problem internationally. But I don't know yet. But anyway, the translation is on, so if all goes well, maybe in a year or year and a half, there will be an English
Version. In the meantime, it is in Greek in our local bookshops.
In our local bookshops, yes.
It's been a pleasure talking to you once again, George. Good luck
My
with
dear.
Volume 3.
Yes, well, the Volume 3, as I said, it should be interesting because it will cover the first 5 years, which I consider as dead years, of the cooperation between DC and DICO. There were no negotiations, there were nothing. And then it's the second 5 years at which there were negotiations, and there were also the intensive effort to go and put Cyprus into the EU, for which I was in charge. So this 10 years period is clearly divided with the same president, but not the difference was that in the case of the first 5 years, Kyprianou had a very big role to play, who was against it. In the second 5 years, there was no Kyprianou there, and Clearidis with us and others was able to support the whole process. And then after that we come to the unplanned years, which is tragic for this country. Unfortunately, the election gave the result that you know, and for which you are still paying.
Your third volume is going to cover as well, I'm sure, the work you did to get Cyprus into the European Union, because that has had a great effect on everyday life in Cyprus.
It had, and between us, one of the reasons I wanted very much to put Cyprus into the EU was in order to secure the future of Cyprus. But unfortunately, we voted no to the Annan Plan, the majority at least. But it was interesting that the late Tassos Papadopoulos, who was the then president, he never dared say that he's against the solution. On the contrary, he was saying that I support the Annan Plan and I will vote for it. But only once we were in, then he said, yes, but we want to correct this and this and that, and then we ended up with what we had.
The promised European solution that never came.
Yes, exactly.
We'll look forward with great interest to the next volume, George, and as I say, a pleasure talking to you.
It's
Thank you very
pleasure,
much.
and thank you for your time.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.